everyone, I'm Sophia with Awaken Catholic, and this is Awaken the Saint. Francis of Paola was, fittingly, born in Paola, Italy in 1416. He was very precious to his parents, as they had been childless for many years, and only had Francis after praying for the intercession of St. Francis of Assisi, after whom their son was named. As you might easily guess, Francis's parents were very devout, and when he was only 13 years old, they put him into a friary so he could learn to read and write in an environment of faith. They also took Francis on a pilgrimage to visit Rome and Assisi. When they returned home to Paola, the 15-year-old boy told them he wanted to pursue his faith as a hermit. After receiving his parents' approval, Francis left home and traveled to a remote cave near the sea, where he began a life of prayer and austerity. By the time he was 20 years old, people had already begun to flock to him. 2 more men joined him in his seclusion, and the neighbors built him and his fellows lodging and a chapel. This was the humble beginning of what would eventually become the Order of the Minims. Francis was so adored by the local people that with the approval of the Archbishop of Cosenza, they began work on a church and monastery for his young order. After 17 years later, the building was completed, and Francis, seeing that they were so widely recognized, decided to set down some rules. In addition to the typical 3 vows that monks would take, he decided the poor hermits of St. Francis of Assisi, as they were called then, would also take a vow of perpetual Lenten fasting. The reputation of Francis's order continued to grow until even King Louis IX learned of them. The king was sick and dying, and in 1481, he offered aid to the order, provided Francis would visit him. Francis, however, wouldn't answer to the whims of the king, and didn't oblige to the request until Pope Sixtus IV approved the notion. The king, fearing his swiftly approaching death, begged Francis to heal him. Francis told him that his life was in God's hands, and he should make his appeals to God, not a mere man. He remained in the king's company and spoke with him many more times, until the sovereign had a change of heart. Resigning himself to God's will, the king died in the presence of Francis. The king's son and successor, Charles VIII, as well as his successor, Louis VII, recognized Francis's wisdom and continued to seek his advice in many matters. During his reign, Charles built several more monasteries for Francis and his followers, but Francis, ever humble, changed the order's name to the Order of the Minims, indicating that he saw themselves as minim, meaning least among God's faithful. After 25 years in France spent advising the kings, Francis fell ill. He died in 1507 on Good Friday at the age of 91 and was canonized 12 years later. The name Francis eventually chose for his order shows that he recognized the danger of pride. The moment when we think ourselves too great to do any wrong is the moment we become most susceptible to sin. Even when powerful men sought his counsel, Francis remembered, as we should remember, that God is always the one calling the shots. St. Francis of Paola, pray for us.